The graph sheet that we use in our studies and in examinations looks like this. On our graph sheet, we have two main types of lines. We have the thick lines and the thin lines. I'm going to zoom into one portion of our graph sheet so that you see what I'm referring to clearly. So I will zoom into, let's say, this portion. You can see that we have the thick green lines and we have the thin green lines between them. That's what I'm referring to. So on our graph sheet, we have the thick lines and the thin lines. The thick lines are called major grid lines. So all the thick lines that you see here are known as major grid lines. And the thin lines between them are known as minor grid lines. So the thick lines here are called major grid lines and the thin lines are called minor grid lines. We can see that some of the thick lines are horizontal, others are vertical. In the same way, some of the thin lines are horizontal, others are vertical. The horizontal thick lines are called horizontal major grid lines, and the vertical thick lines are called vertical major grid lines. In the same way, the horizontal thin lines are called horizontal minor grid lines, and the vertical thin lines are called vertical minor grid lines. So now we know about vertical and horizontal major grid lines and vertical and horizontal minor grid lines. Let's learn more about our graph sheet. On our graph sheet, the distance between one major grid line and the next major grid line is 2 centimeters. So once again, I'll zoom into one portion so that you see what I'm referring to here. The distance between this vertical major grid line and this vertical major grid line is 2 centimeters. In the same way, the distance between this horizontal major grid line and this horizontal major grid line is 2 centimeters. So on our graph sheet, the distance between a major grid line and the next major grid line is 2 centimeters. Another thing about our graph sheet is that from one major grid line to another major grid line, we have 10 divisions between them. Once again, I will zoom into another portion of our graph sheet so that you see what I'm referring to. What I said was that from one major grid line to another major grid line, we have 10 divisions between them. When I say division, I'm referring to the boxes between the major grid lines. From one vertical major grid line to another vertical major grid line, we have 10 divisions between them. In the same way, from one horizontal major grid line to another horizontal major grid line, we have 10 divisions between them. These are very, very important. You have to know them because you are going to use them as the video continues. So we have learned that on this graph sheet, we have vertical and horizontal major grid lines. We have vertical and horizontal minor grid lines. We have also learned that the distance between one major grid line and the next major grid line is 2 centimeters. And between two major grid lines, we have 10 divisions. Okay, let's learn more about our graph sheet. Before we start plotting points on our graph sheet, we will have to choose one of the horizontal major grid lines as our main horizontal major grid line or our principal horizontal major grid line. This main or principal horizontal major grid line is called the x-axis. So before we start plotting our points, we will have to choose one of these horizontal major grid lines as our x-axis. So let's say that we choose this horizontal major grid line as our x-axis. We will have to do the same thing for the vertical major grid lines. We will have to choose one of them as the main vertical major grid line or the principal vertical major grade line. This main or principal vertical major grade line is called the y-axis. So we will choose one of these vertical major grade lines as our y-axis. Let's say that we choose this one. After drawing the x and y-axis, they are going to intersect at a point. Their point of intersection is known as the origin. It is numbered 0. All the points on our graph sheet will be in reference to the origin. So all the numbering that we will have on this graph sheet will be in reference to this origin. Looking at our graph sheet, we can see that the x-axis has been divided into two parts. We have the right-hand side part and the left-hand side part. In the same way, the y-axis has also been divided into two parts. We have the upward part and the downward part. So with the origin at the center, we have the left-hand side on the x-axis, we have the right-hand side on the x-axis, and we have the upward part on the y-axis and the downward part on the y-axis. When we are numbering the x-axis, the positive numbers are on the right-hand side. So we have the positive numbers on the right-hand side and the negative numbers are on the left-hand side. When we are numbering the y-axis, the positive numbers are on the upward parts and the negative numbers are on the downward parts. So after the x-axis has been divided into two, the negative numbers will be on the left-hand side and the positive numbers will be on the right-hand side. And after the y-axis has been divided into two, the positive numbers will be on the upward part and the negative numbers will be on the downward part. Now, let's learn how to number the x-axis and the y-axis. Before we number the x-axis and the y-axis, we will have to know the scale of the graph. In some questions, you will be asked to choose your own scale to draw the graph, but in other questions, the scale of the graph will be given to you. Let's say that the scale of the graph that we are going to draw is 2 centimeters to 1 unit on both axes. This means that we are going to use a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit on the x-axis, and we will use a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit on the y-axis. So how do we use this scale to number our x-axis and the y-axis? Let's begin with the x-axis. Remember that the scale on the x-axis is 2 centimeters to 1 unit. We have learned that on our graph sheet, the distance between one major grade line and the next major grade line is 2 centimeters. So if we take this major grade line, which we are calling the y-axis, the distance between the y-axis and this major grade line is 2 centimeters. The distance between this major grade line and the next major grade line is 2 centimeters, and it continues for all the other major grade lines. The scale we are using on the x-axis is 2 centimeters to 1 unit. That means that after every 2 centimeters, we will have to increase the previous number by 1. So after every 2 centimeters, we increase the previous number by 1. As I've already said, all our numbering will be in reference to the origin. So we will start from the origin. From the origin, the next 2 centimeters will be on this major grade line. So to get the number on this major grade line, we will have to increase the previous number by 1. The previous number here is 0. So if we increase 0 by 1, we have 0 plus 1, which is 1. Remember that on the x-axis, the positive numbers are on the right-hand side. So the numbers here will be positive. To get the next number, we will have to move 2 centimeters. From this major grade line, the next 2 centimeters will be on the next major grade line, which is this one. So to get the number here, we will increase what we have here by 1 because we are using a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit. So if we increase 1 by 1, you have 1 plus 1, which is 2. To get the next one, you increase it by 1, which will give us 3. To get the next one, you increase it by 1, which will give us 4. And the next one will be 5. The numbering on the positive side and the negative side are done in a similar manner. The only difference is that on the negative side, the numbers will be negative. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the positive side. On the negative side, you have -1, -2, -3, -4, and -5. So we have now numbered our x-axis. Let's go to the y-axis. We are using a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit on both axes. So it means that on the y-axis also, the scale is 2 centimeters to 1 unit. So in the same way, from this major grade line, which we are calling the x-axis, to the next major grade line is 2 centimeters. So from here to here is 2 centimeters. So to get the number here, we have to increase the number here by 1. The number here is 0. So if you increase it by 1, you have 1 because 0 plus 1 is 1. On the y-axis, the numbers on the upward part are positive and the numbers on the downward parts are negative. So we have 1 here, the next one will be 2, the next one is 3, the next one is 4, the next one is 5, and the next one is 6. In the same way, on the negative part, you have -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, and -6. So we have now numbered both our x-axis and the y-axis. Let's choose a different scale for our graph sheet and number it again so that you'll be conversant with numbering the x and y-axis. So this is another graph sheet. We have learned that before we plot the points, we have to choose one of the horizontal lines as our x-axis and we will choose one of the vertical lines as our y-axis. So let's say that we choose this horizontal line as our x-axis and we choose this vertical line as our y-axis. When we do that, they will intersect at this point. So this point here becomes our origin. All our numbering will be in reference to this origin. Let's say that the scale we are using for this graph sheet is 2 centimeters to 2 units on the x-axis and 2 centimeters to 5 units on the y-axis. So on the x-axis, we are using a scale of 2 centimeters to 2 units, and on the y-axis, we are using a scale of 2 centimeters to 5 units. On the x-axis, the positive numbers will be on the right-hand side, and the negative numbers will be on the left-hand side. On the y-axis, the positive numbers will be on the upward part, and the negative numbers will be on the downward part. So let's begin by numbering the x-axis. The scale on the x-axis is 2 centimeters to 2 units. So this is the origin. The next major grade line, which will give us 2 centimeters, is this. And the scale is 2 centimeters to 2 units. So from 0, the next one will be 2. The next one, we will increase 2 by 2, we will get 4. The next one, we will increase 4 by 2, we will get 6. We increase 6 by 2, get 8. We increase 8 by 2, get 10. We increase 10 by 2, get 12. And the next one, we increase 12 by 2, get 14. The numbering is done in a similar way for the negative side. The only difference is that the numbers there will be negative. So you have -2, -4, and -6. On the y-axis, the scale is 2 centimeters to 5 units. From our origin, this is the next major grade line. The scale is 2 centimeters is to 5 units. So from 0, the next number will be 5. The next one will be 10. The next one will be 15. The next one will be 20. So you see that you keep on increasing it by 5 because the scale is 2 centimeters to 5 units. The next one will be 25. The next one will be 30. You have 35 and 40. And for the negative side, you have -5, -10, -15, and -20. You can see that the position of the x and y axis on this graph sheet is different from the position of the x and y axis on the previous graph sheet. So one may ask, how will I know where to draw my x and y axis? It's not difficult at all. As the video continues, we are going to learn how to position our x and y axis. Let's say that we have this graph sheet and we are going to plot these points on it. The scale on the graph sheet is 2 centimeters to 1 unit on both axes. Where do you draw your y-axis and your x-axis? The position of the x and y-axis will depend mainly on the scale and the values you are going to plot. Let's begin with the y-axis. The y-axis will divide the x-axis into two parts. So where you draw your y-axis will be influenced by the values on the x-axis. The first thing you have to check is the smallest value on the x-axis. On our table, we can see that the smallest value of x is -3. After you have the smallest value of x, you check the biggest value of x. On our table, the biggest value of x is 3. This means that we have to draw our y-axis in such a way that if we use a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit on the x-axis, we will have both -3 and 3 on the x-axis. Now this is what I mean. Let's say that we draw our y-axis here. If we draw our y-axis here, when we use a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit on the x-axis, this is how our numbering will be like. So here will be the middle, which is 0. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. You have -1, -2, -3, -4, and -5 here. We can see that if we draw our y-axis this way, we will have -3 on it, you have 3 on it. We don't worry ourselves with the values in between them, because if we have the smallest value and the biggest value, the values in between them will automatically be on the graph sheet. So as you can see, we have -1 here, we have -2 here, we have 0, we have 1, and we have 2. So it means that this position of the y-axis is okay for us. When we draw the y-axis at this position, we will have both the smallest value of x on the x-axis and the biggest value of x on the x-axis. So this position of the y-axis is okay. Let's look at the position of the x-axis. You have to position the x-axis in such a way that the biggest value of y and the smallest value of y will all be on the graph sheet if we use the scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit on the y-axis. Remember that on this graph sheet, we are using a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit on both axes. So on the x-axis is 2 centimeters to 1 unit, and on the y-axis is 2 centimeters to 1 unit. So you draw our x-axis in such a way that when we use a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit to number the y-axis, we will have the smallest value of y on the y-axis and the biggest value of y on the y-axis. If we draw our x-axis here, it will divide our y-axis into the upper part and the lower part. As you have seen, the positive values will be on the upper part and the negative values will be on the lower part. When our x-axis is here, and we use a scale of 2 centimeters to 1 unit on the y-axis, you will see that we will have 0 here, then we will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here. The biggest value of y is 5, so it means that we can find that on the positive side. On the negative side, we will have -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, and -6 here. So it means that if we draw our x-axis at this position, we can plot all the y values on our graph sheet. So this position of the x-axis is okay. So after you have the position of the x-axis correctly and the y-axis correctly, you can go ahead and number your x and y-axis as we have here. So determining the position of the x-axis and the y-axis will depend mainly on the scale of the graph and the values you are going to plot. Let's consider another example. Let's say that this time we are going to plot these points on our graph sheet. The scale on the x-axis is 2 centimeters to 2 units, and the scale on the y-axis is 2 centimeters to 5 units. On the table, the smallest x value we have is -5, and the biggest x value we have is 13. The smallest y value we have is -14, and the biggest y value we have is 37. Let's begin by determining the best position for the y-axis. The y-axis will divide the x-axis into two parts. So we have to draw the y-axis in such a way that we can plot -5 on the x-axis and 13 on the x-axis. Now let's look at something. Let's say that we draw the y-axis through the middle. If we draw the y-axis through the middle and we use a scale of 2 centimeters to 2 units to number our x-axis, we will have something like this. So here will be 0, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. At the positive side, we have -2, -4, -6, -8, and -10 on the negative side. We can see that we can plot -5 because -5 will be between -4 and -6. So we can plot -5. But we can't plot 13 because when we draw the y-axis this way, the highest value of x on the x-axis will be 10. In our table, we have an x value which is 13. So we can't draw our y-axis here because if we draw it here, we can't plot 13. It means that we have to shift our y-axis to the negative side so that we can create more room at the positive side. Let's say that we shift it from this side to this side. If we shift it to this side and we use a scale of 2 centimeters to 2 units to number the x-axis, we will have this. We have 0 here, we have -2, -4, -6, -8. On the positive side, we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. This will still not be enough. Even though we can plot -5 on the negative side, we still can't plot 13. So we can't use this position for the y-axis because if we use it, we can't plot 13 on the x-axis. It means that we have to shift it again. So let's shift it from this side to this side. Now when we shift it to this side and we use the scale to number it, we will have -6, -4, -2, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Now as we can see, we can plot -5 because even -6 is on the x-axis, so we can plot -5 obviously. And we can also plot 13 because we have 12 and 14 here, and 13 will be between 12 and 14. So you can see that you don't always have to be in a hurry to draw your y-axis. You have to look through the values and make sure that you position the y-axis in such a way that you can plot all the x values. So in an examination, you have to study the values carefully before you draw your axis, because if you don't take care, you draw the axis, you plot the points, and you get to a particular point, you see that you are not able to plot that point. So you have to go back and erase all the work you have done and draw it again, which will cost you a lot of time. So you have to take some time and go through the values. Then you position the y-axis in such a way that you can plot all the x values. So we are done for the y-axis. Let's go to the x-axis. What we did for the y-axis, we are going to do the same thing for the x-axis. So you position the x-axis in such a way that you can plot all the y coordinates on the y-axis. The smallest y coordinate we have is -14. The biggest is 37. If we draw our x-axis through this major grid line, we know that here will be the origin, so it will have the number 0. If you use the scale to number the y-axis, you have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. And on the negative side, we have -5, -10, -15, -20. We can see that we can plot -14, which is the smallest value of y. We can plot it on the y-axis because we have -15 here. So -14 will be somewhere between -10 and -15. We can plot it. We can also plot 37 because 37 will be somewhere between 35 and 40. So this is a good position for the x-axis because it allows us to plot the smallest value of y and the biggest value of y. We can now use the scale on the x-axis to number our x-axis. The scale is 2 centimeters to 2 units. So we have -6, -4, -2, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Now with this position of the x and y axis, we can plot all the points that we have here on our graph sheet. So to determine the best position for the x-axis and the y-axis, you have to consider the scale of the graph and the values that we are going to plot. We are going to learn how to plot a point on a graph sheet. We are going to use this graph sheet. The scale on the x-axis is 2 centimeters to 1 unit, and the scale on the y-axis is 2 centimeters to 1 unit. Let's say that we are being asked to plot the point 2, 4. When a point is given to us, the first coordinate is the x coordinate and the second coordinate is the y coordinate. To plot the point on the graph sheet, you look for the x coordinate on the x-axis, then you look for the y coordinate on the y-axis, and you check where they meet. That is where you plot the point. So here on the x-axis we have 2, and on the y-axis we have 4. So you look for 2 on the x-axis and 4 on the y-axis. You will see that they will meet at this point. So point A has the coordinates 2, 4. Let's try another one. Point B with coordinates -3, 2. So you look for -3 on the x-axis and 2 on the y-axis. So we have -3, 2 here. So that will be point B. Let's say that we have another one, C, point C, which is 0, 1. So as I said, the first one is for the x coordinate and the second one is for the y coordinate. So you look for 0 on the x-axis, then 1 on the y-axis. So 0 on the x-axis will be here, 1 on the y-axis will be here. So 0 and 1 will all fall on this point. So this is the point C, 0, 1. Let's try another one. Point D, 4, 0. So you look for 4 on the x-axis, then 0 on the y-axis. 4 on the x-axis is this, 0 on the y-axis will be at the same point. So point D, which is 4, 0, will be here. So you can see that when we are asked to plot points that fall on major grade lines, it's very easy. For example, we are asked to plot 2, 4. So you just look for 2, which falls on a major grade line, and 4, which falls on another major grade line, and you can easily trace the point and draw it. But what if we are being asked to plot the point 2.3 and -3.7? We can see that 2.3 does not fall on a major grade line, and -3.7 does not fall on a major grade line. In order to plot points like this, we will have to know the value of each of the divisions on the x-axis and on the y-axis. Now this is what I'm referring to. As we have already seen, between a major grade line and the next major grade line, we have 10 divisions. So for example, between 0 and 1, we have 10 divisions. On the x-axis, the scale we are using is 2 centimeters to 1 unit. So from this point to this point is 1 unit. And between them, we have 10 divisions. In order to plot a point that does not fall on a major grade line, you have to know the value of each one of these divisions or boxes. To get that value, all we need to do is to divide the scale by 10. The scale we are using is 2 centimeters to 1 unit. So to get the value of each of the division on the x-axis, we will divide 1 unit by 10. So you have 1 divided by 10. 1 divided by 10 will give us 0.1. What it means is that on the x-axis, each of the divisions is 0.1. So from 0, the next division is 0.1. The next division is 0.1 plus 0.1, which is 0.2. The next one will be 0.2 plus 0.1, which is 0.3. So the next one will be 0.4. The next one is 0.5. the next one is 0.6, the next one is 0.7, the next one is 0.8, the next one is 0.9. So as we can see on the x-axis, each of the division is 0.1. Remember that we are using the same scale on the y-axis. So on the y-axis also, each of the divisions is 0.1. So now we know that each of the divisions on the x-axis is 0.1 and each of the divisions on the y-axis is 0.1. We got that by dividing 1 unit by 10. So on the x-axis, each division is 0.1 and on the y-axis, each division is 0.1. We can easily find 2.3 because we know that each division is 0.1. All we need to do is to go to 2 and count until we get to 2.3. So that's what you do. Let's go there and see. So we go to 2. We know that the next one will be 2.1, the next one will be 2.2, and the next one will be 2.3. So it means that 3 divisions from 2 will give us 2.3. So we have 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3. We have now identified 2.3. So we go to the y-axis and we look for minus 3.7. When you zoom into minus 3, you will see that the next one will be minus 3.1, the next one will be minus 3.2, the next one is minus 3.3, we have minus 3.4, minus 3.5, minus 3.6, and minus 3.7. So to get minus 3.7, we have to count 7 boxes downwards from 3. So now we have identified 2.3 and minus 3.7. All we need to do is to trace them and see where they will join each other. So we have 2.3 here and minus 3.7 here. So they will meet somewhere here. So this is point E, which is 2.3 and minus 3.7. So when you are given a point to plot and the point does not fall on a major grid line, all you need to do is to find the value of each of the division on the x-axis and on the y-axis. Then from there, you can find the x-coordinate on the x-axis and the y-coordinate on the y-axis and plot them on the graph sheet as we have done here. Let's consider this graph sheet. The scale on the x-axis is 2 centimeters to 2 units and the scale on the y-axis is 2 centimeters to 5 units. Let's say that we are being asked to plot the point A, which has the coordinates 6, 20. So to do that, you look for 6 on the x-axis and 20 on the y-axis. So 6 falls on the major grid line, 20 falls on the major grid line. So plotting the point won't be difficult for us at all. So 6, 20 will be at this point. So that will be point A, 6, 20. Let's take another point. Point B, 2.6, then 23. We can see that 2.6 does not fall on a major grid line and 23 also does not fall on the major grid line. So in this case, in order to plot the point B, which has the coordinates 2.6, 23, we will have to know the value of each of the divisions on the x-axis and the value of each of the divisions on the y-axis. Let's begin with the x-axis. The scale is 2 centimeters to 2 units. As we have seen from the previous example, in order to find the value of each of the divisions, we will have to divide the scale by 10. So here we divide 2 units by 10. 2 divided by 10 will give us 0.2. So what it means is that on the x-axis, each division is 0.2. We are looking for 2.6. So to find 2.6, you go to 2 and you start counting until you get to 2.6. Remember that each division is 0.2. So let's go to 2. So we have 2 here. The next one will be 2.2. The next one is 2.4. And the next one is 2.6. So 2.6 is 3 divisions from 2. We now have 2.6 on the x-axis. We look for 23 on the y-axis. To find 23 on the y-axis, we will need to find the value of each division on the y-axis. The scale on the y-axis is 2 centimeters to 5 units. So we will have to divide 5 units by 10. 5 divided by 10 will give us 0.5. So it means that on the y-axis, each division is 0.5. We are looking for 23. So we will go to 20 and we start counting until we get to 23. Remember that each division is 0.5. Let's do that. So we go to 20. Each division is 0.5. So from 20, the next one will be 20.5. The next one will be 20.5 plus 0.5, which is 21. Then the next one will be 21.5. The next one will be 22. Then the next one will be 22.5. Then the next one will be 23. So it means that 23 on the y-axis is 6 divisions from 20. So we now have 2.6 on the x-axis, which is 3 divisions from 2, and 23 on the y-axis, which is 6 divisions from 20. So we trace 2.6 and 23 and they will meet at this point. So here is point B, 2.6 and 23. Let's plot another point, point C, which is -4 and -14. -4 falls on a major division, so we have -4 here. -4 falls on a major grade line, but 14 does not. So we have to look for 14 on the y-axis. But we know that on the y-axis, each division is 0.5. To get 14, we go to 10 and we start counting downwards until we get to 14. Each division is 0.5. So let's do that. So we have 10 here. The next one will be 10.5. The next one will be 11. We have 11.5, 12, 12.5, 13, 13.5, 14. So it means that to get -14, you have to count 8 divisions from -10. So we have -4 on the x-axis and -14 on the y-axis, which is 8 divisions from -10. So you trace -4 and -14 and they will meet at this point. So this is the point C, which has the coordinates -4, -14. So we have now seen how to plot points on a graph sheet. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe to this channel for more videos. We have learned how to use the scale of a graph to number the x and y axis. We have learned how to plot a point on a graph sheet. We have also learned how to determine the best position for the x and y axis on a graph sheet.